Hello, listeners, and welcome to the first of a two-part special edition of Film Swap, where we look at how old motion picture film that looks like this ends up on your modern cinema and television screens looking like this. We are in conversation with Julia Wallmüller from the Deutsche Kinemathek in Berlin tonight on Film Swap. Join us.
Here is a motion picture film. Let's tidy up this tangle of film by putting it on a reel.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to a special edition of Film Swap. My name is David Seeley, and my comrade over here is the ecstatic gaucho himself, Mr. Jonathan Pritchard Barrett. And tonight we have a very, very special guest.
Yes, our guest tonight is Julia Wallmüller, who's a film restorer at the Deutsche Kinemathek in Berlin, which is a sort of film archive, and she does amazing work there.
Hi, Julia.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Oh, well, welcome. It's great to have you here tonight. We've got lots to talk about tonight. I think we're going to take a slightly different approach to our usual format, in that we're going to forego a lot of the sort of deep analysis of the particular films that we're talking about tonight, and instead we're going to talk to Julia a little bit about the work that she does and the kind of projects that she's worked on. And some of the things that she's working on at the minute. So, Julia, I guess the most obvious place to start would be to get a little bit of an idea about your background in film restoration and how you came to the Kinemathek.
Well, I actually studied film restoration. It's possible to study this here in Berlin. The initial thing for me was the interest in restoration more than in film, I have to admit, because I was fascinated by the idea of, working very detailed with something and getting really into a topic or an artifact or an object and studying it and this archaeological approach of really, knowing more and more about something. So I tried to figure out which kind of restoration you could study in general, because you never study restoration. You always study a certain material, for example, wood or ceramics or something. And so by coincidence, I found this university in Berlin, which offered restoration for audiovisual heritage. That's what it's called today. It was called like photography, film, and data carriers at the time, end of the 90s. So I applied for this university here. I'm from Austria originally, and it was kind of a long way. I had to do 2 years of internship before being able to start the university, because that's what you needed at the time, 2 years of experience, which I did in Austria still in photo lab of the Austrian or Styrian, that's my region where I come from, Styria, the photography archive there. So I was working in a lab. I was also studying a bit photography, like the black and white classic photography for some months. And so I did my internships, and then I came to Berlin and started this university. And it was a bit of a rough time, because we were not so many people studying film restoration. As you can imagine, it was not very widespread. So we were like 2 students in my semester for some time, some of the semesters. And I got stuck here in Berlin, and I'm still here and happy to work now here at Deutsche Kinemathek. Since 14 years, I'm working here.
Was your course part of a film degree course, or was it completely separate from film?
There was some film history seminar, but actually it was really basic restoration. So we had lots of natural sciences, lots of chemistry, lots of working with material. When we started the first 3 semesters, we had to work with all kinds of different materials, because you could also study archaeological restoration there, for example, restoration of technical objects. So I had to do things like, working with ceramics, or cleaning the wheels of an old car from 1910, something like this. All kinds of practical experiences in the field of restoration, until in the later part of the studies we could focus on film restoration, and also photography. But there was not really a focus on film history or film studies, so that's not where I come from. It was really the approach. Restoration was my main interest. But anyway, the thing I really treasure about film restoration is that, the objects are not too old. The objects, the films, and it's not just an object. It's much more. It's a work of art that has to be discovered in many, many different ways. Not just physically, but also from a content side.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Very sort of mutable. So many different dimensions. I suppose you've got not just the visual, but audio as well.
Audio, visual, story.
Yeah.
There are many ways, to get close to the film.
Yeah. Wow.
It's terrific to look at film not just like as a piece of entertainment, really, but as like an actual historical artifact, from another time, and that's quite quite an interesting perspective to take on it. Because you're dealing often with the actual physical artifact, like either the film that originally passed through the camera, or an original print that was in circulation during a film's original commercial distribution. And can you give listeners a little idea about? So, for instance, if you're talking about an older silent film, can you talk about some of the issues that arise about the condition of film prints and negatives and things from decades previous, and the kind of things that you see when you're starting the process of restoring something digitally?
Mm-hmm. So, the thing about silent film, because you mentioned negatives, for example, is that often you don't even have a negative anymore. As many people know, the silent film era has this special material which turned out to be a problem, let's say, in long-term preservation of the films. The films were made in the beginning on a cellulose nitrate base, which is a inflammable material that basically burned also lots of time, or it happened that film material just burned before. So the problem is that as there are estimations that from the silent film era, we have maybe 20% of what has been existing of all this film material we have left, and we have lost 80% of everything. So, the material is highly flammable. So if it gets hot, if it gets deteriorated because it gets old and the base is deteriorating on a chemical level, and it can just disappear. It can just burn and almost exploding. Mm. So that's a big issue. So in many cases, we don't have a negative anymore. In some cases, we don't have any more prints, and we just have, for example, some materials that have been produced from these original materials at some point in the history of the film. So in many cases, when we try to work on a film from the silent era, we have trouble finding something, and this is true for all countries of the world, I guess. This is very much true for countries who have climate conditions where it is difficult or even more difficult to store material. So countries where you have lots of heat and humid climate, they still have big problems of safely storing the material. In Germany, we have this special situation with the war, with the two wars that we had. So we lost lots of material also during the Second World War. And lots of the films that we had are not didn't survive in Germany because because the destruction during the last time of the war, especially, but also because artifacts have been taken away from Germany and maybe you find them somewhere else. Thanks to a quite big interest anyway in the German film, especially from the 20s on. We sometimes find material in other countries, especially European countries, but also the United States. So that's a thing that sometimes helps us. What you usually have to expect if you open a can from an old film is that the film can be in a very critical condition. So sometimes the film doesn't look like film material anymore, so you cannot unwind it, but it looks more like a cake, which is really a real. In German, you would say something like it's baked, like a cake.
Yeah.
So the windings are really melted into each other, and you cannot unwind the film anymore. And talking of this nitrocellulose or nitrate film,
Yeah.
this is really an issue because in this state of decomposition, the film is highly inflammable. So it would already, be enough to drop the reel to make it burn in very bad cases.
So how do you? So is it possible to sort of unpeel this sort of cake?
Depends. If it's really a brown bubbling cake, then not anymore.
Right.
Later on, it turns to dust almost. But until a certain stage, it is, yes. If it has gotten sticky or if it's sticking a bit together, you can do some chemical treatment.
Okay.
So you can, if it's, there are several stages of decomposition. Depending on the stage, you could apply a different chemical treatment to be able to unwind it and to, before print it or nowadays scan and digitize it to at least save what's left of the image.
Right.
Which actually you cannot save it because the film will continue to decompose, but you can at least capture the picture.
Yeah. So does that mean once you've, does that mean some of these cakes you've seen, as it were, they're irretrievable essentially?
Yes. At a certain point, it's the film is lost.
Right. Okay.
That's what happens. But it does not have to happen. So if we are in the position that we can store a film under good conditions, we can also keep it for lots of years.
Okay.
We're talking about centuries theoretically, but it always depends on the history of the film, the way it has been stored so far. Sometimes films are found in the attics of people, collectors or filmmakers, or maybe just people who found a reel of film at the flea market or something like this. So depending on the condition you find a film, it can last many years more, or you really have to take care of it immediately.
Okay.
Is there particular sort of health and safety precautions you have to take if you're opening a can of this old nitrate film? Do you have to observe certain sort of protocols and procedures in order to ensure that you don't, catch yourself on fire or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, the first protocol is that we cannot even deal with nitrate film within the city. Let's say you have to limit yourself to certain places where it's allowed to deal with this material, which is usually outside town. So we usually go to our colleagues in the Federal Archive, in the Bundesarchiv, because they have the stores there, the vaults there with for nitrate film, and and there we can look at material. But usually the material we get into our hands doesn't have this problem. I mean, I remember that when I had film in my hands, which looked really like a cake, let's call it this now, well, we're just very cautious. So we're trying to bring it to a safe place very, very fast. It is something you should not underestimate, because it's a real danger. But it doesn't mean that nitrate film is dangerous, in any state.
Yeah.
So stored properly in a good environment, climatized and everything, it's a very trashable thing that we have to keep, and we must not see it as a danger, as a threat to us.
Right.
But still, of course, this material releases gases, which is nitric acid in this case. So you have to be careful when you breathe this stuff. Also, the film material that has been used later, which is cellulose acetate, also releases gases that smell like vinegar. That's why it's called vinegar syndrome. Quite known also. It's film material that has been used from the 50s on, more or less, for 35 millimeter film at least. And this develops this smell with time. And once the smell is being developed, means that this acid is also getting out of the material and infecting, again, the same material with this acid. So accelerating the process of deterioration. And then also film, which is based on a cellulose acetate, can also form this kind of strange crystalline and baked together reels that at some point are lost as well. So this is not just a problem of nitrate film, but of all film materials stored under bad conditions.
So do you work with sort of chemists alongside chemists, or are you the chemist in this case?
No, it's not that academic anymore. I mean, when you study film restoration, like I did, you have lots of chemistry, but I'm not a chemist. But it's important to know about the processes, even though I could not recall, the details of the chemical process. I could not draw you the formulas anymore. Actually, most people working in film restoration come from the film historical background, or the film scientists.
Yeah.
Actually.
When you're putting together a restoration for a silent film, there's quite a lot of detective work involved. Is there, because my understanding is with a lot of silent films, quite often because the technology for duplication was a little bit more primitive, they'd often shoot different from different camera angles at the same time, and they would actually prepare different versions of films for foreign markets. So say, for instance, if it was a film that was made in Germany, the version that was sent to America or to other European countries might use different takes or different versions of different angle shots of a particular scene. So from a restorer point of view, when you're gathering together different elements to try to piece together a film and get it back to its original state, what are the kind of challenges that you do face when you come into situations like that?
This is indeed a challenge, what you described, but it is not the case for all films. It happens that you have a film which has two or even more negatives. Usually, let's say it's a German production, then the usual thing would be to, shoot the film, do, for example, several takes of one scene, or film with several cameras, as you said. And then using, if you did several takes, like the best takes for the version that is meant for your home country, in that case, Germany, and second choice takes for the export version, which you make for other countries. That could be a possibility, or use the different camera angles or the different shots deriving from the different camera angles. And naturally, you could assume, but it's also not proven, that always, the best shots were taken always for the home version. But this is not always the case. So what you would do in the first step when you work on a silent film, you really look worldwide for film material, because films have been spread. As I said, regarding German film, there was a big interest in German expressionist cinema. So you find films all over the world, or you could find material all over the world, and you try to gather all the film material, and then you start comparing everything. And that's one thing that you try to find out in the first place. Does the material derive from different negatives, or does it all go back to one negative, which would be the ideal case, I would say, because if you have different negatives, then it's getting complicated, because you have to do some more decision making than usual. I mean, there's lots of decision making in restoration, but for example, if you would have the case that you would have two prints of a film and they come from different negatives, would you be allowed to combine those two materials, because neither of them are complete, and to reconstruct a complete version of the film, you would have to mix them? But if you have different versions, one export version and one for the home country, would you be allowed to do that? I mean, would you be allowed? That's a stupid question, but would you choose to do it? Some people choose to do it. Other people say that's a no-go, because you could not mix different versions. So it makes it more complicated. In some cases, you might not find out if you have several negatives. Or if there have been several negatives initially, because you just have an export version, for example, and you don't even have the original version. We can talk about one of those cases.
Well, that's a good segue into one of the films that you worked on that's recently been released commercially on Blu-ray, and it's called Waxworks. Waxworks, a Paul Leni film from 1924. And it's kind of quite a famous example of German expressionism, and it's an interesting sort of anthology film. And you were part of the team that restored that film digitally. So that what we're talking about is a good example, because you didn't have a copy, or is it that no copies exist of the original German domestic version of the film? Is that correct?
Exactly. There's no print of the original German version left of this film. We just had some paper material, maybe in our archive, and of course we have some material, but it all goes back to an export version, to a British version of the film. And in this case, it's difficult to say, for example, if there has been a different version for the German market, or if the versions just differ in terms of intertitles in different languages. So Waxworks, the negative, for example, we know what happened to the original negative. Because it is documented, because it has been released in some newspaper in 1925, that the original negative of this film burned at the custom office in Paris, when it was obviously shipped somewhere to maybe make some prints of the negative. And there was a fire and it burned. So it's one of those typical cases where you lose the original negative in a fire. What we did find of these films, so there was a large research which has been done already many years ago, because the film has been restored photochemically already in the late 90s in Bologna in Italy. And at that time, a big research has been done. We of course, we did another research when we started working on the project, and we found material all over the world. But not all of the material was interesting to us because, as I mentioned before, sometimes you have, prints or duplication material, negatives, or something produced from other film materials. So when you start looking for material, you first, instead of, shipping everything to where you are, you start to find out, okay, this material that you have derives from what? Where did you get it from? Is it based on something else that I already have, for example? Then it's not very interesting. So we found, amongst all this material that we found worldwide, we found just 3 nitrate prints from more or less the time of production, as far as we could tell. And that was a print from the British Film Institute National Archive, which was a very beautiful original print from 1924, tinted and toned, meaning it had colors, because the films were often colored at the time, even though color film did not exist yet. So these were 2 different tinting and toning are 2 different techniques of giving the film a color for a whole scene always. And we had material that we found in France, in the Cinémathèque Française, which was a French print, a French version of the film. Version in this case means just really that you have intertitles, because we don't have sound, we have the intertitles, and they are in a certain language. So this was the French version. And we found material in Prague, which turned out not to be of any help for the restoration project. So our main material for this project were really the material from the BFI and the French material.
So, quick question. So, I watched the film. I really enjoyed it, by the way. It's a terrific movie. And I guess my question is, what's the main differences between the French version and the British version?
Yeah.
Apart from the title.
First of all, I mean, just the language. They are based on the same source material practically, but the difference is that the version that was exported for the British market obviously was a bit shortened, or was also damaged quite a lot. So, or let's say the print was damaged quite a lot. So we have lots of missing pieces. So the French version is more complete because there are less parts missing, whereas the British print has much better image quality. Actually, the French material is based on the British print. You could see that that's archaeological work. When I studied the two materials, I saw physical scratches, for example, physical damage in the British material, which I could find printed in the French material. So that's an evidence that I know, the French material was printed from the British material. That's one of the archaeological aspects of our work. And you search for these kind of things. So you find a splice in one material physically, and in the other one it's printed in, then one is deriving from the other one. So That's the main difference. And the quality is significantly better, or was in this case significantly better in the British print. And also the borders of the image in the French print have been cut off a bit, because there was a big ugly scratch in the British film, in the British print, which they just didn't. They just cut off this image in order to not to have this scratch in the French print. So that was the main difference. But still, and the language of the intertitles. But the rest is the same.
Right. Another question. So when, at the very beginning of the process, so you're sort of given this job of restoring Waxworks. So your first job is basically to sort of, or one of your early jobs is to send the emails out to sort of around the world to all these film archives. Is that how you found the bits?
That you can do that, but it's lots of work sending all those emails. But there's the federation of the Fédération Internationale des Archives du Film, the International Federation of Film Archives.
Yep.
And they are connected. So that's a good thing. The film archives are connected. They have a special database for silent film where you can look for research for silent film materials. So if all the archives do their homework, let's say, all the material concerning silent film is in this database.
Sorry.
Sometimes not everything is there because every archive or almost every archive has a dark, corner where they didn't get to look yet. But so they are connected, so you can search there, and then you write to those archives where you find something. Additionally, of course, if you have, if you suspect that, for example, we should check Vienna. Vienna is not in the database, but I mean they are. But in this case. There was nothing in the database, but I should check there. Maybe you write an email. That's advisable if you have already an idea, a specific one. Of course, there are some countries where you could preferably look for German prints, which is France, which is England, Switzerland, also Holland. So typical emigration countries also for German filmmakers, because sometimes they would just also take their film material with them. So that's how, for example, lots of material ended up in Holland because it was taken there.
Okay.
Wow. Is there a great deal of cooperation between all the archives? Like, are they, like, if you reached out to someone in Holland and said, do you have anything, is there generally quite a lot of cooperation between all these different countries and all the different archives?
Yes, there is. I mean, especially in those cases of silent films where you have to puzzle together a film from different sources. Sometimes the cooperation is just, I give you my material and you do the restoration. But in other cases, it's also, it involves a bit more from both parties. For example, now I'm working on a project where the archive in Brussels has the original negative of the film we want to restore. So they are providing us with the raw scan of their negative, and I then continue working on with this material. So it depends. Sometimes you really cooperate in the sense that both parties do something, and sometimes you just lend material, but it's still a cooperation. So for Waxworks, it was a cooperation between Deutsche Kinemathek, the British Film Institute, and the Cinémathèque Française.
So I guess what part we talked a lot about the actual film, but of course a silent film, a lot of it's about the sound or music, not sound exactly, I guess, but music. So how do you sort of address that issue?
There are different ways. If you are very, very lucky, you find some kind of original score for the film.
Right.
That doesn't happen very often. Sometimes you have films where you have where the composer made some kind of playlist, you could call it, suggesting several known music pieces to play along with the film. Sometimes you find something like this. Often you don't find anything. So then you have, of course, the possibility to show it, to just, restore it just as it is, without music, and then show it live with music performances. So you could, do piano music, or you could have some whatever you want, drums and saxophone,
right.
Or an orchestra, if you wish. But and sometimes you get some kind of cooperation, which was, for example, the case for Waxworks. We had for the music a cooperation with Arte TV, which is a German-French TV. And they contracted a modern composer to compose a new music track for the film. So this happens sometimes. It's always kind of a special project. We did this because there was also a presentation planned on the Berlinale Festival, where we had this premiere of the restoration of Waxworks with the newly composed music score in a big house here in Berlin with an orchestra. Usually you have to provide the composer, the musician, with a reconstructed version. So at a certain point you have to deliver like the final edit, and then the composers start working with this material, and then you get what you get.
Yeah. So with Waxworks, the original soundtrack was completely lost then?
Yes. Okay. There was nothing.
Can you talk a bit about some of the kind of difficult choices that you have to make editorially when you're putting together a restoration? Like, say, if there's missing bits, or you mentioned that you had to base your restoration primarily on a British copy of the film. So, how do you approach making decisions like that? Like about what bits maybe not to include because maybe it's in too poor condition, or just talk us through that process about how that works when you're trying to piece something together and you are faced with these challenges.
Yeah, Waxworks is actually a very good example for this because of the very big difference in photographic quality that I mentioned between the two materials. So puzzling them together, doing a reconstruction out of those materials is a bit of a difficult thing. The aim for this project was what we had agreed on within my institution was that we would try to really reconstruct every single frame that we have. So reconstruct every scene as complete as we could. Meaning that if my main material, because it's the photographically the best, is the British print, and I have some missing parts there at the beginning of a scene or at the end of the scene or even in the middle. So in the middle is especially critical because what happens if you have a scene, a person walking by and then some images are missing, then you have a jump. So the person walks and suddenly 1 meter, it's 1 meter ahead. So if you have these gaps in your sequence, then you could, of course, fill them with material from other sources if you have them. In the case of Waxworks, we had lots of possibilities to fill because the French material was more complete. But still, you have to somehow try to mix this material and make a continuous, a fluid experience for the viewer. So if you change from one material to the other, of course, you will notice the difference in the quality. And I guess I don't know how well you could notice it when you watch the film, but I guess you have noticed that sometimes the quality changes, it gets better and it gets worse. And it's especially, there's an irritation if it gets worse for just a very short moment, because we see basically 24 images a second. I mean, it's less in case of a silent film sometimes. I think in Waxworks we had 18 at the end. And but you still, so if you have 3 images missing, you cannot really see a change of quality. You just see an irritation. It gets somehow strange for such a short moment, and then it gets better again. Or it gets strange, it gets worse for a longer part. So puzzling something like this together is a bit critical. Also, I mentioned before that the borders in the French print were cut off. Mm. So we have less image content actually in the French print. So if I try to mix these two sources, I have to cut off the borders in this scene in the better material as well. Because we cannot, you cannot just make the image smaller or bigger just for a short piece of a scene, at least for the scene, not for the whole film. So that it matches, because you have to match it, in terms of image quality, but also image geometry. Yeah. So that's a very elaborated digital workflow, you have to really try to match the two the two geometries of the two images so that they would fit. So transmission from one would be fluid so to the other. So that's hard. Then you also have to match the contrasts, the lights, the colors. The colors are anyway a simulation, but also the amount of damage. For example, you have to try to do retouching in a way that the two sources would look somehow the same. So this is a critical decision. You could also decide not to include every single image, every single frame that you're missing. You could just, if there is a gap, there is a gap. That's how the film survived, or that's how this print survived. You could also work in a way that you say, okay, for each scene, I take the more complete source, the most complete source, and mix them. That you would not have this change of quality within one scene, or you could stick to the better material. So that there are lots of possibilities. I have to say, we always talked about when we were in the process. We realized that what we were creating was some kind of Frankenstein, because you try to make it look better and make it look better, and you see that, wow, the more you mix, the worse it gets, actually. I mean, it got pretty well. I mean, I think the result is quite good, but I have to say,
it looks amazing, actually.
Yeah, but looking back, I would have maybe not reconstructed every single frame.
Right.
So
you have disagreements amongst your colleagues sometimes about how to handle certain things. I mean, presumably you do sometimes, but is that...
Of course. Although we try to consult each other, also it's we work like this, that one person takes care of the restoration, and sometimes we consult, or we ask for help, or we support each other. That's for sure. But basically, you take the decisions. In the case of Waxworks, I didn't take all the decisions the way, or not freely. Let's say there were some things we had agreed on. So I stuck to the plan. I would have chosen maybe to do a little bit less of Frankensteining, but it turned out very good. I mean, we had a very good lab working on the film, which was the lab in Bologna, l'Immagine Ritrovata, and I mean, they did an extensive job, which we could do there because we had this cooperation with Cineteca di Bologna. I forgot to mention before, because they were our actual financial cooperation partner in this project. So that was very important, and thanks to them, we could also really do extensive work on this film.
So most of the work you're doing by this stage is all sort of digital.
Yes.
So they've done all the sort of the stuff with the actual reels of film.
Well, you start always working with the reels, so that's the first thing you do. You just take the film material in your hands, and you check if there are any tears or if there are any damages, and you check the photographic quality and everything. And in case of an old film like Waxworks, a nitrate film print, of course, there's lots of repair that has to be done. Sometimes we do it ourselves also, but if it gets complex and if it gets very extensive, it is crucial that you know exactly how the film has to be prepared for a certain type of scanner, which you will use to digitize the image. So these cases we often leave to the specialized labs, or to the, let's say, the places where the films are scanned.
Right.
But that's where the analog work stops. Actually, that's preparation and let's say analog restoration of the film material, and then you digitize, and all the rest is done digitally.
So another question. So So do you have to sort of read reviews and sort of contemporary sources made at the time of the film was made to sort of inform the way you edit and sort of restore the work?
Yeah, certainly. That's something that we always do, not just with silent films, but also with newer films that we try to look in our archives. We also have in Kinemathek, we don't have just a film archive. We have different archives for photography, for papers, for scripts and everything, and lots of other things. And so we try to see if we find any material about the film, reviews or, invitation cards for the premiere, which could contain an information, for example, about the music or other things, scripts, if there are, to gather as much information as possible. And that should be done before you even touch the film material, actually, or let's say before you start scanning and editing, certainly, because you might find important information. So, for example, for Waxworks, there is the original script, or the original script has been published at the time as a book. So you can actually buy the script and read it. It's quite fun, but it's in German. Maybe I just found an Italian translation, if that would be an option for you. But it's very interesting to read. But an original script has some disadvantages, or can have disadvantages. My experience with original scripts is that they actually don't correspond that much to the film. Than you would expect, or you would wish to, for example, if you're trying to figure out what the film looked like initially. So the script was also for Waxworks some kind of basic document, but obviously when they shooted the film, they did lots of things very differently. So there are lots of differences between the script and the film in the case of Waxworks, for example, which has to do with the production history of the film, which is a bit didn't go quite as planned, I'd say.
Yeah, they ended up not finishing it, didn't they? They had more sequences planned, but they didn't finish it because I guess they just ran out of money or something, and they weren't able to shoot everything that they wanted.
Yeah, I was about to say, is there anything missing from Waxworks? Yeah, that sort of answers that. Yeah.
Yes,
the last section, Jack the Ripper, because there's 3 different stories, and the last section is just 5 minutes long. And I sort of thought, why is that? That's just something's happened there, I'm sure.
Well, actually, I assume that the last sequence has always been that short.
Oh, really?
I don't think. Yes. I don't think that it has been shortened. The thing is, maybe I can tell you a bit about the production history, because it's actually then make you understand the difficulties. The film, well, it was presented in 1924, but the Paul Leni started actually thinking about this project or planning this project already in 1920. And when he got into his hands a first version of the script, which was written by Henry Galen, and so Leni instantly acquired the rights for the story because it fascinated him. And he had his own production company, which he founded in 1922, Leni Film AG in Berlin, and he announced at that time already Waxworks as his first big project that he would realize. And he planned a film with 4 episodes and some kind of framing story, some kind of background story. And so from the year 1922 on, you find several press announcements of this film, several flyers, graphics that have been made to announce and advertise this film that hasn't even been shot yet, or they couldn't even think of shooting yet because they didn't have any money. Shooting was postponed several times. We had in Germany, there was the upcoming and ongoing inflation. So money lost its value constantly, and Leni just couldn't start shooting. And they finally started shooting in spring 1923. So, as I said, the plan was to shoot 4 episodes. And he started shooting them in a certain row, which is actually the what you have in the final film. So you have the Harun al-Rashid episode, the Ivan the Terrible episode, and the Jack the Ripper episode. And the 4th figure, which was actually supposed to be episode 3, that he wanted to realize, was the character of Rinaldo Rinaldini, which was some kind of Italian thief that would save a noble princess, the Princess Violante, from a bunch of banditi that had robbed her. And they would fall in love, of course. And to film this episode, Leni was thinking of, Italian mountains scenery that he wanted to have. So he would either need a very big studio, which he didn't have at the studios where he did shoot the film, which were studios in Berlin, Weißensee. And so it was not possible there. He would need a bigger studio, or he would have to shoot in Italy, which wasn't possible either. From the timeline of this production, you can see that he obviously was trying to realize somehow this 4th episode, but obviously he didn't manage. The months passed, and finally the film, he presented it 2 times for censorship in Berlin. So you can see he tried to get to a finished version. Then again, he waited like 8 months more until there was a premiere, which actually happened in Vienna, and we don't know anything about it. And there was a second premiere in Berlin later on in 24. And that's where we had a kind of final version. At the premiere, actually, the film, the episodes were presented in a different order, which is kind of interesting. And it might be that the reviews from the first show in Vienna were in a certain way influencing him to change the episode, because this Harun al-Rashid episode, the Baghdad episode, is actually the most entertaining one. So he put that at the end of the film for the German premiere in Berlin. But it was changed later on back to the initial order. If you look at the script of the film, you will see that the single episodes differ quite a lot. And the Jack the Ripper episode, the one you were interested in, it's actually much, much, much longer in the script. And it has alternative endings in the script. There are two different endings for the film described in the script. But the way the sequence, the episode is built in the film, to me it seems actually complete, although it's very short. And in all the reviews from the time of release, it is described as very short as well.
Okay.
But it also shows us that obviously, I mean, he had in mind a very long episode, telling a story, telling an end to the film, maybe even 2 endings, and he just couldn't realize it. I think that's the thing. He just had to end somehow, and obviously didn't get any more money to produce more material. And that was a kind of sophisticated episode, because you have double exposures and everything. So technically, it's quite ambitious.
So of the bits that are still missing from the version that we have today, do you think were they just scenes from the existing segments that have been lost, or do you think there was?
I assume, as far as I remember correctly now, that what is missing, I think mainly we miss parts from the framing story, from the background story, the poet, the writer, Wilhelm Dieteler, who writes the story, because we have some indications in the text material that I studied, where you could tell that there have been more scenes between the writer and the daughter of the Waxworks owner, where they talk and interact. So I guess there was more in that part of the film, and maybe also I think I found something about missing parts in the Ivan the Terrible episodes. Maybe there were some additional shots, but and if you compare the length of the film as it has been presented to censorship, because that's where you had a documentation about the original length of the film in terms of meters. And we compare it to the restored version, there's quite something missing. So that's bits and pieces for sure also. But I guess mainly the background story. I don't think that we miss a lot from the Jack the Ripper episode.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's just an assumption.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't even know, but we talked about the versions before. So the versions that we have from this film are the English and the French version. We don't have anything from the German version. So I cannot even say if we had a different negative for the German version. Although I guess not, because this supposed original negative that burned in Paris obviously was used for the production of something abroad. So I guess there was just one negative, but it's just a guess. Right.
Can I just ask you, because you mentioned about censorship and about some of the editorial decisions that you have to make, could you just briefly touch on, do you bring some sort of kind of ethical guidelines when you're doing these restorations in terms of preserving things, like for instance, obviously if there are problematic elements in a film, or there are things that maybe you're thinking about modern audiences, how do you approach a restoration in terms of the ethics of preservation and things? Is that something you could touch on for us a bit?
Do you refer to critical content, or to if we should if we sometimes think about making the film more to adjust the film for modern audiences in terms of what we are used to see or hear in the cinema?
Well, I guess what I'm thinking is, because you work in an organization that is there to preserve historical artifacts, but when you think about the commercial distribution of older films, for instance, there was a story not long ago about the French Connection, and how Disney had removed some kind of racist sort of language from the film, and things like that. When people have made changes based on modern sort of tastes or modern standards and things like that. So I guess as an archivist and as someone who's working to restore and preserve these pieces of history, how would you approach things like that?
Yeah, it's it's an interesting question, which of course I can have my personal opinion, and then there can be a strategy of an institution. It's something that most institutions are forced to think about. What do we do with critical content? And it's not just can we show it, can we not show it, but also some more questions that arise. My personal opinion, and also so far what our institution is doing, we are not censoring or canceling contents when we work on a film, because this is part of film history. And I mean, if you see a film like Waxworks, the image of the women in the film is a catastrophe, and everything. If you look from the female point of view, I mean, you can look for racist contents also. You have Emil Jannings doing the Caliph of Baghdad. I mean, that's everything is questionable in this in this film. And if you look from a female perspective, I guess you could, you would have to wipe out like 85% of film history from the past century. So that's difficult. It's part of our society. It's part of our culture. The films that we have, of course, we can choose not to show certain films. There's especially in Germany a period where we have where this decision is taken that you don't really program certain films, although which doesn't mean that you should not preserve them. Maybe I would say I would refrain from canceling certain contents from the film itself. I don't think it's a good option if you talk about film restoration. Of course, you can, if you do, a release of a film and you choose to do some kind of, modern version or modern edition. If you call it a new edition and if you inform about it, then of course you're free to do it if you can manage the rights and everything. But when we talk about restoration, the aim would be not to change the original work. So that would be actually a no-go. Like putting color to black and white film, which has always been black and white, colorizing this, that would also be a no-go for restoration. It can be an option for a new version, for an artistic version, but within the restoration, it's no option. Another thing in this context, for example, which is more difficult, we do subtitling when we do restorations. Of course, we try to provide different language versions in terms of subtitling. So there you have a different situation. If there are many, racist expressions in the film, I cannot cancel the sound score, but I could think about, how do I translate this into subtitling? Although if I use less strong expressions, I'm again changing the work for the person reading the subtitles. Difficult. We're discussing this, so I wouldn't even say I have a clear opinion about it. I maybe would tend not even to cancel within the subtitling, for example, because it's the language that is used in the film, and sometimes it's important to understand this language properly. So we do audio descriptions, for example. That's a totally new version, and of course, within an audio description, I would really check carefully not to use any inappropriate expressions. So that's something very clear for me, because it's not translating the film like a subtitle, but explaining it. So there you could be, more cautious, I guess. But as I said, it's a process of discussion. It's something that in Germany, the film archives, we have several film archives in Germany, also due to the history of the country. So we are in discussion about that. How should we deal with these contents, and maybe how should we present those films, for example? Do we have to contextualize certain films? But showing old films, you will always have a group of people who will be, somehow treated badly in the film.
Yeah.
Maybe for, racial things or feminist gender things or whatever.
Yeah, it is a tricky thing, isn't it? And I guess it's easy if you're approaching things as a historian, or you can understand the context of it. But I think just for general audiences, I can understand that it is something that's always going to be up for debate and always problematic, isn't it? For something like Disney Plus, if they're going to put a film on there, they have to think about who's seeing it and what the who's likely to see it and how they're going to interpret something.
Giving context is really important. So just showing something critical without, saying at least a few words before the presentation, that's maybe a problem.
Yeah. Just on before we go for a break, I was just wondering if you, because I know you'd mentioned in some of our discussions before we recorded that you'd made an interesting find on a project called Sylvester, and I'm just wondering if, like, you could share with us either that story or some stories about when you made some really fascinating, interesting discoveries while you were rooting around for elements and things like that. And if you could share like a good, exciting story about when you found something really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, if I can share the Sylvester story, I'm happy to do it. Anyway, it was the special, very special project for me because it is a film, again, a German film that well, it has survived in that there is like, let's say, a fragmented nitrate print in Germany that has survived, but it's very fragmented. The film has been shortened here quite a lot, and it has survived in a more complete, almost complete version in Japan, because there was a today quite known collector who bought lots of films, especially German films, and brought the prints to Japan. And there's an important collection at the Japanese Film Archive with those nitrate prints, where you really find treasures. Also, sometimes unique pieces of films that you don't find anywhere else. And so we had a good version of this film, Sylvester by Lupo Pic. It's also from 1924. We had a cooperation with the Japanese Film Archive, and studying the written material and some invitation cards from the premiere and so on, I saw I saw information about the music that was originally composed. This information was also known and public. The original music score was composed by Klaus Pringsheim, who was a German composer and conductor who also lived in Japan for lots of years of his life, which doesn't have to do anything with film in the end. But he was, by the way, the twin brother of Katja Mann, the wife of Thomas Mann, born Pringsheim. So we saw this name, okay, Klaus Pringsheim, and we thought, we have to check if he's somehow related to the Pringsheim family. Maybe we find something in the, and then we saw that it's Katja Mann's brother actually, and we thought, maybe we can do some research if we find something in what is left of Thomas Mann's heritage. And so I started to research a bit, and then my boss, actually my ex-boss, Martin Körber, he always tells this story that actually he did forbid me that I would invest more time in researching for any music scores that you anyway wouldn't find anymore. But I couldn't resist, so I kept on looking a bit. And by actually simple internet research, I traced the son of this Klaus Pringsheim, who's called Klaus Pringsheim Jr., and he was a professor at a Canadian university in Ontario. And his archive is archived at this library of the university in Canada. So all this was somehow digitized, or at least there was an inventory that you could study. So I opened the inventory, and we actually found the music score. Everything was written in a wrong way. Sylvester was spelled in a French way, like Sylvestre. And music was spelled wrong, and everything was spelled wrong. So that's why we didn't find anything at once. But actually, there was this score.
Wow!
And the score was so important for this project because this print that had survived in Japan was edited in a very strange way. I don't know. I don't understand why, but somebody re-edited this film apparently without any concept. There were like scenes put in the wrong order, as if somebody tried to do something else and then put it back together, but in a very wrong way. On top of that, the film has lots of atmospheric scenes filmings showing people on the streets of the New Year's Eve, the night of Sylvester. And these scenes are somehow, they don't tell the main story, so they are atmospheric, so you could put them almost everywhere in the film. So it was really hard work to figure out, where do all the scenes belong to? And the music score, first of all, contained synchronization points, information written between the lines by Klaus Bringsheim, by the composer, referring to what you should see in the film at a certain point of the music. So this, in the first step, helped to do re-editing in the film. And then, of course, you had lots of scenes because it didn't always explain very detailed what happened in the image. It just would say something like street or husband or wife or mother. We worked with a conductor, Frank Strobel, a German conductor, who tried to reconstructing the music score. And we worked together, Frank and I, to try to figure out which pieces of film, for example, are missing for a certain length of music, because I can read the notes, but I cannot read the score. I can read what is written there, but not the music. So he told me, for example, okay, this theme is going on for 23 seconds. So what we are missing, and the scene that we have there is just 8 seconds. So there has to be a different one. And together with him, we tried to do many, many recuttings. This puzzling together in the film in combination with the music was a very, very special process, and really a rare thing that you just find a score like this in a place where you would not, think of looking. And the music score is very impressive as well. So it has been recorded then by an orchestra, and it's really impressive. It's a very impressive score, a very modern score for the year 23. Today, sometimes maybe it sounds a bit funny because it's very. It has some very fast changes, but at the time it was kind of modern. Unfortunately, the story behind the score is that they had the premiere in Berlin, and there is a text from an interview from a woman who saw the premiere, and she describes the scenery that, in a way that the audience was laughing at the film and at the music and didn't enjoy the music at all. So she says, because she was a cutter, she says or claims that right after the first show, at the night of the premiere, she did some recutting because she remembered at which points of the film the people were laughing. And so she cut out some parts and did a recutting. And maybe that's what we have preserved in Germany, because it's basically just the main story, all these atmospheric scenes that I mentioned before, that are really the great value of this film, because the basic story is a dramatic story. It's not very interesting, but what is especially nice are these atmospheric filmings of the people on the streets. That's really nice. And the special thing about the film, so in the moment that she did the recutting, of course, the original music score could not be used anymore. So the music was presented once at the premiere and never again until we could do the reconstruction.
Wow.
It's a nice story.
Great story.
No, that's amazing. And so is there any way... you had mentioned that you're not able to commercially release the film at present because of some issues with the rights.
Yeah, unfortunately, not at the moment. No, just watch out for presentations of the restored version. I mean, we have been presenting it already in Bologna, in Paris, in San Francisco, but yeah. Unfortunately, you have to watch out for the live event for this film.
Okay.
Still.
Well, there you go, folks. Keep an eye out for that, because it'll be really interesting to see that. Hopefully, they show it here in London, maybe at some point at the BFI down at South Bank. That'd be awesome. And also we talked about Waxworks, which is also available from Masters of Cinema in the UK, and I believe Flickr Alley
Yes.
does Blu-ray in the United States. And I'll mention too that on the Waxworks Blu-ray there is an interview with yourself, isn't there, Julia?
Yes.
Talking about the restoration of the film and some of the detective work that went into restoring it. So if you want to hear more, by all means, go and check that out as well, because it's excellent. If it's okay, we might just take a little break, and then when we come back, we were going to talk about some different types of films that you've worked on, including some experimental films from an artist called Dor-O, and also some really interesting early sound films from Germany as well. And you can listen to the second part of our conversation with Julia on the next episode of Film Swap. Make sure that you follow or subscribe to the show so that you don't miss out when the show goes live. We'll see you soon. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Film Swap podcast. If you like this podcast, please consider giving the show a rating or leaving a review. This helps other listeners find the show. You can follow the Film Swap on social media. We're on Twitter and TikTok at Film Swap UK, on Instagram at Film Swap Media, and on YouTube at Film Swap_podcast, and at Facebook at Film Swap the Podcast.
Oh, the things these nerdy middle-aged men get up to.